Well, everyone, welcome back to a very exciting episode of the Storybox podcast. Today, my friends, you want to learn how pretty much exercise. Finally, someone has created a book that proves that exercise has significant benefits to all our health, our mind, healing that, how we can overcome anxiety, depression, dementia, improve our focus and creativity, all those wonderful things. I've been saying it for as long as I've been exercising. I can't give you the numbers on that, but her name is Dr. Jennifer Heisz. Now, for those of you that don't know who she is, she's an expert in brain health. She's an associate professor in the Department of Kinesiology.
It's a mouthful.
I was practicing that for 2 weeks, Jennifer. I kid you not. I knew I was going to butcher it, and alas, I did. Thank you so much for the assist for that. But you studied at McMaster University, which is ranked top 25 in the world. So you're pretty intelligent individual. I kind of feel like I'm below my britches here. Today. But you also direct the NeuroFit Lab, which is pretty cool. You attracted nearly $1 million to support her research program, which is not an easy thing to do, I believe. The effects of exercise for brain health. You've got this new book, which is called Move the Body, Heal the Mind, which is out right now. People can go and get a copy of it. But Jennifer, can I welcome you so much to the Storybox podcast today?
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here and being very flexible with your time. Really do appreciate you and your work, and very excited to dive further into it in just a moment. Exercise. I love exercising. I think it is the most beneficial thing on the face of the earth aside from food. And when I found out about your work, I'm like 100% yes, let's dive in. This is going to be a very interesting conversation. My very first question for you though, Jennifer, is a question that I love starting off all my conversations with, which is, what does success look like for you?
What does success look like for me? I guess achieving the goals that we set out to achieve. I guess that's how I see success. And everybody has their own unique personal goals that they set out to achieve, whether that involves exercising and incorporating exercise into your life, or, trying to qualify for a world championship event. Success can have various levels of intensity involved in it. Setting out goals that maybe push us outside of our comfort zone, and then achieving those. Good question. I mean, I haven't really formally defined success before.
It's a perfect way to dive right in, right? Like I love doing that. You mentioned goals. Like, what are some of your goals? And do you, on average, you normally tick them off? Like, are you very good at ticking them off?
Yeah, I have been very goal oriented. So the book was a major goal for me. And I did have some goals around exercise. So I recently started into triathlon. So that was around 2017. I started into the sport, and a goal became to do the longest triathlon race, which is an Ironman. And so I set that as a goal, and much to my surprise, I was able to accomplish it. So I definitely like to set goals and, strive for them, even if I think they're outside of my capability, like the Ironman.
These are consistent goals that you set for yourself every single day, or are they just the one-off ones?
Well, I guess, to be totally honest, I have had sort of really large goals since I was around 20, so in undergrad and when I was in college or university, I basically was, had a goal of becoming a professor. And so that was a very long goal, took a lot of work and time. And then the goal of getting tenure, and then the goal of writing a book and doing this. So they've been very lofty goals. And actually at the moment, I'm a bit lost for goals. I mean, I have I will achieve these things, and definitely a task list, a to-do list that I aim for every day. But my typical lofty goals are, I don't really have one right now, which, I'm just waiting for something to pique my interest.
I guess this is a question I would normally ask at the end, but I wanted to ask you this now. Like, out of curiosity, do you have like something that is big enough, like a big goal that you want to sort of strive towards at the moment, or is there nothing you've thought of?
Well, the book was such a big goal for me. It took all of my time and effort. I poured my whole heart and soul into it. And I mean, partly because it's not just a research book. Like, yeah, I do research on exercise in the brain in my NeuroFit Lab, but it was so personal. And it was the first time I had ever been open about my struggles with mental health issues and very candid about that. So that took a lot out of me emotionally. And then describing how I was able to use exercise to heal my own mind. And yeah, and now, the book has received such great interest from many different people. So I've been focusing on getting the message out, getting the book into people's hands who it will help the most. Spreading the message around the benefits of exercise for the mind and the brain that people may not realize.
I know firsthand what it's like to write a book, and you're right. It's not an easy thing to do. It is downright painful, and we continue to do it. And we question ourselves, why are we doing this? But your book in particular, you mentioned that you did get vulnerable in the book, as well as provide a lot of scientific research-backed evidence to prove that exercise does benefit our overall health, and it can help our mental health as well. And I've noticed that in my own life, which is a major part of why I exercise. Mm-hmm. And I'm grateful for that. I mean, if I didn't exercise, there'd be a world of problems.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that. But I'm curious, like, what got you interested in the first place with exercise? Have you always been a relatively active individual?
Mm-hmm. No. in fact, I was quite overweight when I was a kid. I struggled to find sports that I could do well. And so I really wasn't very active until I was in my 20s. And I was in grad school. I was studying the effects of the brain, studying the brain, sort of the fundamentals of the brain. So how does the brain represent memories and who we are? And it became very clear to me that something wasn't right with my own brain. So the stress of graduate school had brought on this severe anxiety in me, negative thoughts, intrusive thoughts. And I had no idea what to do. So I went to the school physician, and they offered an antidepressant, and I was very reluctant to take it. So fortunately and surprisingly, I borrowed my friend's rusty old road bike, and I was amazed that those bike rides really soothed my mind. And it not only shifted my perspective on exercise, so it became like, my medicine, my go-to to help me in my personal life, but it also shifted my professional life. So I started studying the effects of exercise on the brain rather than just the fundamentals of neuroscience. And that's what inspired me to open my NeuroFit Lab.
And what exactly goes on when someone, I guess, starts exercising? What goes on in the brain? What's happening to those neurons?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot of really amazing things that happen to the brain when we exercise, and we don't even need to move that much, which is really a nice message, I think, for a lot of people. So when we sit for long periods of time, which we've been doing a lot lately, this really starves the brain of the vital nutrients it needs to thrive. So blood oxygenated flow decreases. And so every 30 minutes, research shows that take a 2-minute movement break. And this short movement break is enough to replenish the blood flow to the brain that you've sort of lost from sitting for so long. So oxygenated blood flow is one. epinephrine or adrenaline, norepinephrine, noradrenaline. This is something that stimulates the prefrontal cortex. It helps us to focus and prevents us from mind wandering or daydreaming. And research from my lab shows that just a 5-minute exercise break is enough to keep you on task for an hour. 10 minutes of self-paced walk is enough to boost creativity, which is a pretty awesome, especially for us writers, right? You need those creative ideas flowing. And the way that works is really interesting because the brain works in networks. And one of the networks that the prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain, mediates is that focus. And that's the inhibitory control. So that's one network. But then there's a slightly different network or network switching that has to take place for creativity. And so in order to engage that part of the network, we need to change what we're doing. We need to sort of essentially cross-train the brain. So we can do this with exercise. We can do this with a self-paced walk. We can do this with resistance training, something that's different from what we're doing now. And it's that variety that helps the brain switch back and forth between tasks and gives us sort of the ability to think outside the box, which we need to be creative. So there's so many amazing things. It increases growth factors in the brain that actually help support new brain cells especially in a brain region called the hippocampus, which is needed for learning and memory. So brand new brain cells supported by the growth factors stimulated with exercise. It also helps stimulate resiliency factors like neuropeptide Y, which help protect the brain from trauma. So there's so many incredible things that exercise does to really give the brain the nutrients it needs to thrive.
Is this intensive exercise, like a long run, lifting heavy weights, or is it more like an easy walk or lifting barely any heavy objects?
Mm-hmm. Well, so some aspects require hard work. So that's like the endorphins we're familiar with, the runner's high. That long, hard run is needed to get the endorphins flowing, because essentially the endorphins are the body's natural painkiller. And so when the body starts to ache from working hard, it releases the endorphins that help soothe our aching muscles, but also give us that rewarding feeling. But a lot of these benefits can be felt with just light to moderate exercise. The resiliency factor, the boost in oxygenated blood flow, the change in, creativity network, the mental flexibility, all of those can be felt with just very light to moderate movements.
So for someone like myself that exercises pretty much every single morning, I go for, say, depending on how I'm feeling that day, maybe a 48 to kind of fluctuates between 48 to about an hour's run. And then I'll do like a 45 minute CrossFit style body weight workout sort of thing. I notice that some days are better than others. And I'm curious, why is that the case?
Yeah. So in terms of how you feel, is this what you mean? Or so probably has to do with what's going on in your life. And why I say that is because we only have one stress system for all stressors in our life. So exercise is a stressor, and wow, you're doing some pretty intensive exercise, right? Especially compared to a lot of people. So that's a pretty intensive regime. And then if you're adding that exercise stress on top of stress that's happening in your life, like say you didn't sleep well, or you have a deadline at work, or you have, you've had an argument with a friend, you're adding on to that baseline level stress, your exercise stress, and you may not be able to tolerate as much. And so stress inherently is really good for us. Like an acute amount helps us to adapt and grow into the stronger version of ourselves. But we can go too far. Like too much stress actually does the opposite. It weakens our body and it can cause, disease, mental illness, for example, and it can make us feel bad. A lot of people find that, especially during times like these, like the pandemic stress, the uncertainty of the situation, the change in life as usual, has caused a lot of people to feel a lot more psychological stress in their life. And for me, at the very beginning of the pandemic, I was training for an Ironman. And like you, I had been, I was fit. I was in the best shape of my life. I was exercising regularly and intensely, but the pandemic hit and I felt I would almost have a panic attack during my run because I wasn't able to tolerate the same level of exercise stress as I was before the pandemic because of the situational stress. Yeah. So I'm guessing that's probably what's happening for you is that, maybe you've kind of pushed it. So we have like allostasis, which is like good stress. And then we have allostatic load, which sort of tips the balance to the point where it's actually better to probably have a rest day.
Right. Okay. That makes a lot of sense now because I do notice that like some mornings I start off feeling great. And then when I get like maybe midway during my run, I'm like, well, this sucks. Why is this sucking? And then when I finish it and I complete it, like I always push myself like to actually finish and I'll feel a lot better after I finished it. It's just during that actual process of me working out those muscles that I'm not at my optimal self, like my peak self. And I always thought it was how much food intake that I got the day before, like helping out. But it's interesting how you mentioned stress because that makes actually a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's cool. Like a brain region called the insula. It's keeping track of all of this stuff. Like even if you haven't eaten enough during the day, it's keeping track because that's a stressor too, right? So all of these like physiological stressors in what we're eating and how we're exercising, but also the psychological stressors, like what's happening in life, it's all adding together to affect the same system. So it's all going to come back to impact us. And so we might not be able to perform as well as we expect to during exercise some days. And I think that, we need to really take a compassionate approach to that and be like, that's okay. I'm getting it done. And at the end of the workout, I'm going to feel good. Guaranteed, right? Guaranteed.
How does age play a factor in this or does it?
Well, exercise is extremely beneficial across the lifespan from children all the way to older adults. In children, it can be really beneficial at promoting sleep, for example, promoting learning and creativity, as I mentioned. Students who struggle to focus and pay attention, they can benefit a lot from daily exercise, which is really nice. And then as we increase in age, exercise becomes really important for helping deal with life stressors. So it's extremely beneficial at reducing stress and anxiety levels. So every single workout has the potential to reduce anxiety. And especially during transition times. So that's happening, a lot of changes happen during adolescence and early adulthood, and exercise can help us like ease through those life changes. And then as we get older, it can help prevent things like dementia, which is, a lot of people are really afraid of and want to prevent that. And so, exercise can help prevent that too.
Exercise preventing dementia, which I think is a wonderful thing. And if people are listening to this and they don't want to get dementia, the prevention is always the key, right? So exercise, is that okay for you? Like that's what's going on, like the stimulation within the brain, all those things that you're talking about is keeping the brain healthy enough so that it doesn't get unhealthy to cause the symptoms of dementia or even cause dementia from actually happening in one's life. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So in the book, I talk a lot about, there's sort of two approaches here. So the first is when the body is not healthy, the brain is not healthy. So for example, high blood pressure, there's only like really 3 degrees of freedom between having high blood pressure and dementia risk. So high blood pressure, which can be caused by sedentary lifestyle, right? Not moving enough. It weakens the blood vessels that feed the brain, that starves the brain, and then can start to damage the brain and its vessels so that it's not working as well. And that can lead to dementia. But exercise can be really beneficial. And research from my lab shows that when we look at dementia risk and compare genetics versus physical inactivity, they both contribute to dementia risk similarly. So physical inactivity contributes to dementia risk as much as genetics, which a lot of people don't realize and is pretty amazing. So you can't change your genes, but you can change your lifestyle. And then when you want to change your lifestyle, when you're ready, the way to do it is, through walking. We've talked about walking, but there's a special way of walking that seems to be especially beneficial for preventing dementia. And this is interval walking. And what is that? Well, it's essentially regular walking, but every now and then you're picking up the pace. Okay. So you're picking up the pace between light posts, you're adding in a few hills to your route. Essentially, you're, increasing the intensity a little bit of your walk to the point where it's a little bit difficult to have a conversation. And so why is this so beneficial? Well, it seems to suggest that, when we're exercising, walking intermittently, like walking vigorously, we can accumulate lactate, which most people associate lactate or lactic acid with the burning sensation in the muscles. And a lot of people are like, oh, I got to get rid of that. It's bad. But it turns out that lactate may be one of the most powerful promoters of neurogenesis, which is the birth of newborn brain cells. So the lactate moves from the muscles through the blood to the brain, and it releases growth factors there to promote and help support the functioning of new brain cells. And research from my lab shows that interval walking in particular is better than regular walking at boosting memory in older adults.
Wow. Who would have thought that pain actually is beneficial?
Yeah, a little comfortably challenging is how I like to say. But obviously, always check with a healthcare provider if you're starting a new exercise program, right?
Yeah, I remember when I first started doing CrossFit, the amount of my first workout that I ever did was Murph, which was like this ungodly set of exercises, and the amount of lactic acid that built up within my muscles and I just felt like I was dying. But then afterwards, like I completed it and the lactic acid just dropped. I was like on top of the world. I'm like, I feel so much better. Like this is awesome. But actually getting to that stage of completion during the lactic acid buildup, that's the key. Like that's the hard part. And I think once people can do that, they feel 10 times better as a result. And now we've got science telling you that it can reduce the effects of Alzheimer's and dementia and increase your levels of overall health, which I think is absolutely fantastic. I'm definitely not for a sedentary lifestyle. I mean, I bought a stand-up desk. I've got movement happening all over the place. So I'm very much an active individual, but I'm curious, like you also speak about the mental health side of things, about depression and anxiety and all those sort of things. And you do open up about some of that, I believe you mentioned in your book. Would you be able to share more about that and your experience with exercise and healing your mental health?
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned, the research shows exercise can be really beneficial during times of transition. So for me, my mental health always became really challenging during these times of transition. So the first was in graduate school, when the stress of studies and, intense pressure of competing and performing really started to cause severe anxiety in me. And that's when I discovered that rusty old road bike and learned that bike rides could really soothe my mind. The second time was after I had my baby, during postpartum. A lot of people experience postpartum depression, but for me, it was a little bit different. It was much more, it was like OCD. So what a lot of people may not realize is like OCD sort of looks a lot like anxiety, but it's like intrusive thinking, intrusive thoughts. It's very stressful, very anxiety provoking. And so that happened postpartum, and I was able to couple my light exercise, which is what I could do at the time, with cognitive behavioral therapy. So kind of combining the psychotherapy with the movement, and research shows that the two are additive and beneficial. And then the book really tracks my my entry into triathlon. At my final transition point so far, at least, was unfortunately my marriage broke down. And so as I was trying to rebuild my confidence and, strength, mentally and physically, I started this new sport of triathlon, and wow, did it ever give me a huge boost. The first boost was like winning, or at least coming in second place for the try, my very first triathlon, which, is a low-key try. It's not that long, but it really motivated me to stick with it. And I ended up qualifying for the World Championship in the half Ironman, which is actually in your part of the world. It'll be in New Zealand in 2024. So I'll be coming there. But just across the bay. Yeah. So I've personally found that exercise has been extremely beneficial during these difficult times of transition, when my mental health sort of flared up. And but I think the real message is certainly you don't have to do a triathlon, but every step counts. A little bit of movement goes a long way. And I know when people are struggling with mental health and mental health issues like depression or anxiety, it can be difficult to be motivated. And in fact, right at the beginning of the pandemic, my lab conducted a survey of over 1,600 people and found, people shifted why they wanted to work out. So it wasn't so much about looking good anymore, right? It was about feeling good. But there was this paradox, like they wanted to work out to support their mental health, but their mental health was getting in the way. So they lacked the motivation to do so, which is a symptom of depression, and they felt anxious to do so. And so I think when we talk about using exercise to help manage symptoms of mental health, whether they're depression or anxiety or OCD, we need to really reframe it differently. It needs to be a very compassionate approach where our mantra is some is better than none. And, it's okay if we don't, perform our best every day or even achieve what we set out to. I like to have this like mental health mode of exercise where, let's say, today I was supposed to do a 30-minute run, but I wasn't feeling that good. So I'll do the time, but I'll take off the intensity. So I'll negotiate with myself and I'll put in the time, which was 30 minutes, but I'll do a walk instead. And so it's more about consistently moving. And the research shows, especially with depression, it's less about intensity of the exercise and more about duration. And just 10 minutes is enough to boost mood. And you get that benefit even more the longer you walk, for example. And you also get the antidepressant effects with resistance training, but there actually intensity does matter. So the heavier you lift, the bigger the boost you get in mood.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing. I know it's never an easy thing to share. And I'm sorry to hear that the marriage broke down and you had to go through all these things, but I'm also thankful that you did find exercise. And for those people that are like freaking out, like doing an ultra or a marathon, I mean, Jennifer's probably a further ahead with that than I am. And I mean, yes, I run a lot, but I don't do ultras. I don't do triathlons. I don't do any of that sort of stuff. I mean, I do want to do a marathon one of these days, but I don't know when that's going to be. Maybe further. Me and my friend have been talking about it. He's like running 30 kilometers every day or something like that.
Oh, wow.
He's getting up there. Whereas me, nah. But yeah, I just appreciate you sharing all that, Jennifer. And for those people that are wondering, like, can I get addicted to exercise if I am a person that does struggle with addiction, and I am that person? And I do want to also say that at one point in my life, I did get addicted to exercise because it drew me away from those other addictions that I was suffering with. And I didn't see this other addiction, which was exercise, come into fruition. So for those people that are wondering, is it easy to get addicted to exercise?
It's not easy to get addicted to exercise, actually. And partly because exercising is hard to do, and the brain actually prevents you from doing it too much. It sends down pain, right? That's like the first indicator that you're overtraining. Pain, there's stress, there's fatigue, to the point that you actually can't it takes a lot of effort to overtrain. It's very different than like a drug of abuse, for example. And in the book, I talk about how exercise actually does help a lot of people who have struggled with addictions to recover. And the way it does that is by helping to replenish and restore the reward system. So when we abuse drugs, they basically hijack the brain. They hijack the reward system. And unlike naturally rewarding things like food, sex, and close ties with others, drugs of abuse have supernatural levels of dopamine that they release, and that's too much for the brain. The brain can't tolerate that. It was never designed to do that. And so what it does is it essentially like locks down, like it seizes, it strips away the receptors as a defense against this too much dopamine. And when dopamine can't bind to its receptors, it can't stimulate that rewarding sensation, that feel good, which leads to tolerance and, other compulsive to use drugs, etc. When an individual decides to stop using drugs, what happens is that the reward system gradually starts to reopen, replenish the dopamine receptors, and exercising helps to speed that up. It speeds up the opening so that the brain heals faster, which is really amazing. And in your case, it sounds like maybe you replaced one addiction with the other. But I think that, the research shows it's actually pretty rare. So less than 3% of the general population are addicted to exercise, and less than 5% of even athletes are addicted to exercise. So I think it's important to keep in mind, like, what does it mean to be addicted? Just because you enjoy doing something and you do it often doesn't necessarily mean you're addicted. So like when I was training for this Ironman, I was training 25 hours a week. That's a lot. And, from my mom's perspective, having never been really an athlete, looking at me now, she was like, are you okay? Are you addicted? But I was following a very regimented schedule. I wasn't going beyond that. I was working with a coach who was guiding me. And so if there's no harm to either yourself or to others, then there's likely no addiction. And I think that maybe that's an important, just like a simple thing to just check, and be honest with yourself. If you're working out to the point that you're hurting yourself, like physically or emotionally, or it's causing disruption throughout the rest of your life, then maybe it is an addiction. other times people can have exercise addictions that are linked up with sort of eating disorders or disordered eating, and it becomes a form of punishment. But that's not a pure addiction per se. So that's another important thing that to keep an eye on.
Yeah, so that all makes total sense. Like, I have this tendency to go to the extreme for a lot of things, and the addictions that I had prior to this one, they were pretty significant. Like, they were hurting me, and I didn't even know they were hurting me, and they were actually causing a lot of problems in my life. Like, I had a massive addiction to porn to start off with, and then that bred into me starting exercising. And then I realized that because like this was like decreasing my sex drive because I was exercising too much, which then made me feel a lot better because I thought I got rid of one addiction, but then I didn't notice the other addiction that was coming into its place, which was the exercise, it was like a filler, if that makes sense. And then that filler was like causing me even more pain because I started losing more weight. I didn't care that I was losing weight. Then came the eating disorders as a result of the extreme to exercise, right? So my viewpoints towards food was very negative. Like, I would hardly eat anything. I'd be very restrictive. I'd only eat like a particular, like maybe my diet was 5 or 6 different food groups: chicken, 1 kilo bag of spinach every day, cheese sauce. Like, it was disgusting, essentially is what it was. And then everything just all came to a crashing halt. Like, it got to the point where I ended up in hospital for 9 days, 2 hospital trips. And then after that, I ended up with the repercussions of going to the extreme with those things. And I didn't realize that my addictions had hurt my family, all that stuff, more than just myself. Like, I was being selfish. And then, like, those eating disorders, they never go away. They always stay with you. They're like these little inner demons. And because you have an addiction of prior to, like, like that addiction stays with you. Like, it might be like this subtle friend that just comes up every now and again. So that's what I've got to be mindful of. And I guess I'm using exercise as a way to combat my exercise addiction, if that makes sense at all. Like, I just use it and I'm not going over and above anymore. Like, I'm very, very grounded, very mindful that this could put me in the ground if I go too far. So I guess it's just being aware, being conscious, and then having the knowledge behind you to not go too far and not make it. But you're right, like, it is very rare, and I do tend to do things. I'm a phantom. I do things abnormal. That's just the fandom way.
I mean, it's like, on one hand, it's sort of your superpower, right? It's like you go hard in you're overzealous in everything you do, which has probably allowed you to accomplish a lot of amazing things. And learning how to hone that is something that just, it comes with experience. And it sounds like you're right on track, and maybe it does make sense to work with a coach who can keep you in line. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I find. And I feel that way about my own self, like, I also have this sort of overzealous, I go all in. And I do find that having like a coach or a therapist or someone just to like check in with to make sure that, the thinking is on point, is helpful rather than harmful, that the activity is helpful rather than harmful. And I think that's really what we need to really be focusing on, is like self-care and, self-compassion when we're approaching life. Even if we have big goals, like, we can have big goals and we can be dedicated to those goals, but also making sure we have time to take care of ourselves and be, there for our family and friends.
wonderful balancing act, isn't it? Like trying to keep life as balanced as possible, like the pendulum swing. We're not going too far this way, not going too far that way. But if you do, like, just be mindful, and you can always come back to the present moment or the middle, so to speak. If you want.
It's funny. I find like work-life balance, for example, is almost impossible, right? And this idea that like life comes in waves and you just have to kind of keep the waves sort of, the difference between the bow and the trough, like less, and like you don't want big undulations. You want sort of a ripple, and trying to ride that ripple of a wave. Sometimes you'll be more into one thing than another, but it'll sort of all sort of even out at the end. I think that's sort of the goal.
They say the wave, right? I use the analogy of a roller coaster ride. Like you've got the steep slopes, the quick turns, jagged edges, those sorts of things. But I also say, like, strap yourself in, because it's going to be one heck of a bumpy ride. That's also okay. Like it's like the surfer that rides the wave. I mean, all surfers fall off eventually. Like, it's fine. Even the most professional, Kelly Slater, how many times has he fallen off a wave? Like, it's fine. It's life.
Well, and if you're, part of living a full life is challenging yourself and pushing yourself outside your comfort zone to the point that you might fail. And that's okay. That's the point, to you really test your boundaries, because you might surprise yourself. They might be far greater than you even imagined.
You won't know unless you give it a go.
That's right.
So, but Jennifer, I want people to get a copy of your book. I got a couple more questions for you, if that's all right with you. They're short questions, I promise. But where do you want people to get a copy of your book right now? And what do you hope the most for people to get out of this book when they read it?
So you can get a copy of my book anywhere books are sold. So I have a website, Jennifer Heisz, HEISZ.com. And that has links to where you can buy the book, but also the backstory and some videos of my Ironman event you can check out, which is kind of fun. And when I think about what I want the book to mean, or what I want the main message of the book to be, is really to let people know that they're not alone. I think mental illness can be can be a lonely struggle. And for me, it was a big secret for many years. And I just want people to know that they're not alone, that there are people who are successful that have struggled and learned to live with and manage their mental health. And we need to really break down that stigma that's associated with it. And so the whole book is really about doing that, and talking about the biological basis of mental illness and how exercise changes that biological basis to make us feel better. And so it really tries to equate it to like a physical disease. Why do we think of it as something different? They really are. It's emerging from a disordered brain, which is a physical structure, which is no different than a disease of the body, right?
Well, I, for one, cannot wait to get my hands on a physical copy. I know things sort of take a little bit longer these days, thanks to the pandemic, to get to Australia. But I'm very excited to hold one in my hands and actually read it and share it with everyone. I'll make sure everyone knows where to get a copy of it. Links will be in the show notes below for people. But Jennifer, my second and final question for you is, what do you love the most about yourself and your story?
I think I love the most about myself. Okay, let's do this. Probably my honesty. I think the genuineness that I have, and my ability to just see everybody at the same level and try to relate to people. And so I think that I really like that about myself, because it it does allow me to resonate with people. It allows the research we do, even though I'm like a professor at a university, but I can talk to people in a way that I do understand, because I've lived through it, and I'm very open about that, that I also struggle. I am a human being. But I happen to just have all this knowledge that I'm very generously hoping to share with as many people who need it. So, yeah. So that was the first part of your question? Was that it?
Second part is, what do you love the most about your story?
What do I love the most about my story? I think the ending. The ending of my book, my book, you mean, or of my own personal story?
Your own personal story.
It's just, it really is unexpected. And I think no matter how much we plan and think, we've got it all figured out, there's always something that changes, and but it brings so many gifts. It opens so many new doors and so many possibilities that send you on a new path and a new way of discovering more about who you are and more about what you can do to help create a better world.
Thank you so much for sharing. I really do appreciate it. This is my final question for you. This is my all-time favorite question. I love asking all my guests at the end. It is a hypothetical one, but I want you to imagine with me for a moment that you've been able to reach the age of 100. All your friends and your family have decided to put together a film for you of everything you've ever said and everything you've ever done. Don't ask me how in the world they got it all. We'll call it magic for the sake of argument. They've been able to get it and show it to you on your 100th birthday. What do you want that film to say and to show about your life?
I wanted to show that I had a meaningful impact on the world, and, at the local level, like with my daughter, but also at the global level in terms of helping people that I have never even met live a better life. So yeah. And what's actually funny is that there's evidence to suggest we actually do that sort of on our deathbed. We do this life review. And so actually they suggest that you do it intermittently, like throughout your life. So once a year, doing a life review of, what would they say about me this year? And then focusing your next year's goals on the things that you really liked that happened. So I do that actually. So I do think a lot about this because it's important to me, to really make the best of my time. Yeah, it's cool.
And I have heard of that research, which is another reason why I started asking this question in that particular way. It's a little bit different, creative, I know. But it gets you to really think of what kind of leader am I being right now, so that when I die, will people remember me when they see, or when I get to 100, will they look back and see all those things that I wanted to be and did it come into fruition? So I'm always thinking about that too. Like it's part of the forefront of my brain.
I think it's important to think about the bigger picture, the legacy, because it's so easy to get caught up in all the little stressors of our life and get reactive to that. And that's where it becomes really damaging to our health. So, stress in and of itself is not bad. It really is our reaction to it. And when we have this bigger why, this bigger picture, then we're better able to be resilient even through times of stress. And having exercise built into that really does help solidify and fortify that mindset.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for your story, your wisdom, your advice, for writing this book, and for joining me today on the Storybox podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.